Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. So I have been able to watch the Lifetime movie, and I must say I think I gave it a lot too much credit based on the article, the assessment by Fox reporter Mike Ruiz. You may remember my saying that the best place to start the story, to kick off the Gabby Petito story, would have been at the Moab incident. And although that is what happens, there's really only about 80 seconds that is dealing with that, and there's not very much dialogue there before it goes back into Gabby and Brian's backstory. And I must say that's where it loses me. It doesn't really resonate. The maturity levels, the subject matter just doesn't feel like Gabby or Brian. There's nothing about art. It just doesn't feel authentic. So I am going to take you guys through a detailed analysis, my review essentially of the Lifetime movie, some of the things that they completely miss, some of the things that they get right, basically just a review. In this episode, however, we're going to talk about the number one clue we all missed. And this is obviously tipping our hats a little bit to something that appears in a Lifetime movie that really expands our knowledge base, our insight in terms of the Gabby Petito story. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment. Bear in mind, later this week, I'll also be doing a new thing, something completely new to this channel, TCRS Book Club. And I'll be letting you know what the first book is that we'll be dealing with at the end of this episode. So stay tuned for that. And let's get started. Now, in your mind, you may have already thought about this fleetingly, but it's only when it's dramatized and you have a second photographer right there that you see what it felt like to be Brian, doing this again and again and again and again. Think about it. Who was behind the camera for all of Gabby's social media, for each and every one of those Instagrams? Well, it was Brian. It may not seem like it's a big deal, but Brian is connected to Gabby's social media directly because he's the one capturing it. And he's also the one was engaged to her and now he's not, still capturing her social media, still capturing it, and other people are seeing it and responding to it. How does that feel? And so a couple of things are happening here. Gabby is performing for the camera. Gabby is performing for Brian, who, as I say, is her partner. But also, Gabby is presenting herself to an audience beyond Brian. And the idea is to monetize the Instagram. And that's the area that is very difficult for Brian to accept. In a way, is Gabby flirting with Brian, or is Gabby flirting with social media? Now, it's in that third respect that Brian's partnership with Gabby as the silent photographer sort of falls away. He discovers himself receding into the position of a voyeur, except it's not satisfying or pleasant, but the opposite. He's a reluctant voyeur. And so to remind everyone that Brian is actually in the picture as well, even though he isn't, even though he's falling out of the picture, he probably asks, pesters, complains to Gabby that he's not in the picture. But that doesn't seem to work or to help either. Here's the critical part though. Brian is essential to the creation of Gabby's social media. So he is invested, and he's also invested in Gabby as his fiancée. And then there is also his own social media. But the pertinent point is that Brian shoots every image of Gabby, and Gabby then curates which images she wants to use and what she wants to say in terms of each one, and whether she wants to reference Brian and how much she wants to reference him. All of this setup basically puts Brian on the spot constantly. Does he feel validated or invalidated? Does he feel reinforced or undermined? Does he feel in control or as though he's losing control? Because Brian can't escape being the creator and enabler of Gabby's social media, and he can't escape the reality that hers is taking off and his isn't. And so Brian is in a bind. It's been confirmed over and over again in the social media sense that Gabby's interesting, Gabby's attractive, Gabby's desirable, Gabby's in demand, and he is, well, less so. He's not so interesting. He's not so attractive. He's not as desirable. So, to put it bluntly, she's hot and he's not. Now, you may say none of this is new, and it isn't. But I want you to take it a step further and imagine yourself being responsible for all of someone else's social media. Just imagine that idea. You are responsible for all of someone else's social media. So you've got to deal with their insecurities, the little edits that they want, their vanity, their preening in front of the camera. Also the response to that. It's how they want their photos taken, what angles they want, how often they want photos, and then also the response to those photos. Whether you like it or not, you're roped in. And whether you like it or not, you're sort of faced and sort of forced to see how well your work featuring them comes off online. Is it coming off too well? So the exact same thing also happens in reverse. They see how well or how poorly you come off in social media. Meanwhile, you're also in a relationship with that person, and so because of that, if some of the content irks you, you may feel that you have the right to exert control by the dynamics of your relationship. If you love me, you won't put this up. If you love me, you won't say that. Or if you love me, you will do this and you will say that. The same works in reverse, and I'd be interested to know whether the Lifetime movie depicts Gabby photographing Brian, right? What do you think the answer is to that? And Brian in this situation showing how unnatural, inadequate, and insecure he was, not only in front of the camera, but even worse, translated onto social media as well. So because Gabby also had to take photos of Brian, in exactly the same way, Gabby would be aware of which photos Brian used and what the response was to them, but also, in a general sense, Brian's confidence relative to her own, Brian's diminishing confidence relative to her own increasing confidence. She would also see how few comments and endorsements he was getting, and then she tried to soothe his inadequacy and try to make excuses for him, but it would be obvious what was going on. There would be no reason to say anything because it would be self-evident. But that same thing about soothing and making excuses and sort of calming over, that's exactly the same thing she did during the Moab incident. She was trying to minimize the criticism and hits he was no doubt getting. But the reality would be obvious without anyone saying anything. The numbers would say it all. The number of comments, the number of likes, the number of new followers. Once the reality had set in that Gabby's star was on the rise and Brian's was dimming, it probably wasn't so much fun participating in Gabby's social media anymore, because it was a case of never a good deed goes unpunished. Each successive Instagram would do its work, proving that Gabby was a commodity that interested others, and Brian wasn't. Every exposure to that social media would make Brian feel less and less adequate. And now consider this. Imagine if Brian and Gabby had embarked on this trip already married. Imagine if that was one aspect that you could just change. You could flick a switch and their status going onto the trip was that they went on it already married. I think this aspect likely would have far less significance, meaning the feeling of inadequacy wouldn't be so fraught if they were married, because now it was fraught. Now he was being tested as a potential marriage partner and found wanting. But if he was already married, he could kind of relax in a way and say, well, the pressure's off. But since the status was that their marriage was on hold, all the social media did was basically confirm to Gabby and to Brian and to everyone watching that she was better than him after all. She was better off without him, or that he wasn't good enough for her after all. Now you can imagine being in a relationship with someone and being in a position where on a daily basis you're expected to expand their status, enable that traction, basically boost them, but it's all at your own expense. Putting them in the picture is all about shooing you out of yours. Everything you do is only hastening the inevitable, the realization that you're not good enough and soon you won't be around. So what are Brian's options? To try to control Gabby, to try to control her social media, or to control her access to her phone, to sort of continue the van life adventure while abandoning the social media enterprise because it presented such an existential threat to their relationship. Was that an option? But abandoning the enterprise means the trip isn't sustainable either. And if the trip and social media collapse, it sort of represents everything, including the relationship, that has collapsed as well, hasn't it? Now, although the cover image where you can clearly see Brian set back, capturing Gabby in a photo, is the number one clue that really reveals his perspective with crystal clarity. Yes, that is the clue we all missed. This image also shows something I think that is easy to overlook as well. Brian also has a phone. Think about that. What do you think he looks at obsessively every day on his phone? Well, her social media. Her social media that he's helped capture. Her social media that he's helped create. And also his social media. And then comparing the two. And it always ends up the same. He loses every time. And then he wants to blame someone or gain something because he feels like he's losing control. He feels like he's losing Gabby, and he is. And in this situation, what is Gabby supposed to do? She wants the van life adventure to work. Is she supposed to try to not be attractive just to appease Brian? Just how is she supposed to present herself that will be acceptable? Well, maybe the answer is not sexy. Preferably like this. Sweet, not sexy. Flirt with me, Gabby, not with the camera. And the subtitle to this slide captures precisely that sentiment. Stop showing off to the world. You're my girlfriend. You're my fiancée. Now, it's easy to forget that for Brian and in Brian's mind, the summer epic was a kind of honeymoon. The van life journey was a sort of consolation prize after the wedding was put on hold. And whether you accept that or not, the star of the van life journey was undoubtedly Gabby. She made it work. She was going to possibly bring it off. But the part that's so easy to miss is that at every photo you see of Gabby, Brian is the photographer. She's the star. He's making her the star. Well, what is he? You remember him saying, my biggest fear is that one day I'll wake up and it will all have been a dream. Well, isn't that what happened? Isn't that what happened, that he woke up and he did find out that what he thought was real was becoming unreal? And even worse, he saw it happening before his eyes. Each time he's taking a photo, he's realizing, I'm losing her. What I'm doing is helping to lose her. I don't want to keep doing it. So today, where we are now, Gabby is still the star. A year later, Gabby is still the star of the story. Think about it. Brian's Instagram has been deleted. And so Brian's great terror of waking up into some harsh reality where he'd suddenly become invisible and expendable, it ultimately came true, didn't it? And so I don't think it's a coincidence that when it was all over, Brian decided to have his actual physical body consumed by wild animals, devoured, reduced to nothing, just a skeleton. Because I think in a social sense, in a social media sense, he felt devoured, emasculated, invalidated, extinguished, destroyed inside and out. Remember, he wrote, I have killed myself by this creek in the hopes that animals may tear me apart, that it may make some of her family happy. I've always found that quite strange, that sort of awkward, kind of bristling reference to her family, as though she disapproved of him. You kind of get a sense that Brian knows someone out there is looking on, looking on to their social media journey with scorn and disapproval. Think about how he blamed Gabby, then he blamed himself, and then he simply had no desire to live in a world that seemed to have no place for him in it. This is what happens when your entire identity is either entirely attached to a person or to social media, or so poorly developed that the slightest bump and the house of cards disintegrates. Brian's world was Gabby, but the problem was Gabby's world wasn't just Brian. As someone said on Patreon, if we depend on others to give us our self-worth, we basically are doomed. We've got to derive our self-worth ourselves from within, through our work, through our efforts, through who we are. So I'm not going to take it further than that. I am going to be doing a live stream in terms of a TCRS book club. I know I've been talking about it for a long time. Well, it's happening, and it will be happening this week. Now, talk about this whole idea of developing self-worth. Think about that in relation to Elvis Presley. And we're going to be dealing with Elvis through this incredibly well-written book. I'm really astonished, really impressed by this book by Albert Goldman. Like all definitive stories, it was written at around the time that Elvis died, very shortly afterwards. So all of that information is very current, very accurate, very real time, and you can feel it in the prose. The opening to this narrative is incredible, but there are also incredible chapters dealing with the end of Elvis's life, just incredible detail in terms of the drugs that he used, the last day. The detail there is exceptional. And this is from the perspective of a true crime author looking in on somebody else writing about the last moments of a particular really famous celebrity. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. So watch this channel for further detail. It'll be sometime this week, not sure when, maybe Tuesday, maybe Thursday. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.